My gosh, that felt like an extremely long episode. Muv-Luv episode 7, I think, probably one of my favorite episodes. Kind of covered a lot of content in this episode and really kind of nailed in certain aspects that I think, based on the comments of last episode's impressions, was kind of stuff that was needed. I know that it had a lot of feedback from my impressions on the last episode. How I think I downplayed the experience of Shirogane first seeing Sumika again. I kind of just got wrapped up in talking about this Lucky Lecher thing where he's being transported into a restroom, but at the same time, I do acknowledge the fact that yes, Shirogane was emotional in that particular scene. And I think the thing that a lot of people probably are afraid of is me losing the context of Shirogane having these built relationships with all these people and then having that experience of them seeing them again, which honestly, I think is only a thing that somebody who has read the original source material, the stuff that's before this, would ever kind of see as a problem. Whereas me from the outside looking in at just this adaptation, I don't necessarily see it. Now, I do give credit to that. I think there's a lot of series that I have watched and experienced where you spend a lot of time with characters and eventually get to those emotional points that I think if somebody's seen the last 5 episodes of that story, wouldn't get as much impact. I think I expressed that when I was talking about Higurashi When They Cry, when I watched the Go and Sotsu series. When I was reviewing that series, the thing that I pointed out was, yeah, you can jump right into Go and Sotsu, but you won't get as much emotional impact for certain characters who have technically been through a lot of crap in the previous seasons. You get less of an impact. The impact is there, but you get less of an impact because you don't have as much investment in that experience that they've gone through. But again, like I said, I think this episode kind of remedied that perspective, at least in my eyes. And I know it's never going to be as much of a remedy as somebody who has experienced the visual novels and all the prequel stories to really dive into their relationships. But I did see, especially in this episode, that struggle that Shirogane is facing. What I mean, it's the idea of the entire episode at the very end. It's nostalgia. The nostalgic idea of building an image into your head and then desiring it afterwards. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. Starting off from the very beginning of the episode, we pretty much have Shirogane talking about the difference between the two worlds. He's really hitting on heavily on this idea. Now he's in this world, his previous world. It's a peaceful world. Everybody's so happy, but he's questioning what makes it possible and who makes it possible and how. He's essentially like the old veteran, like, you kids don't understand what you're enjoying right now, what we faced before, why not enjoying what you're experiencing right now based on the sacrifices that we had. It's essentially what he's going through. He's like talking about, these people don't understand how it's important to fight for what you care for. Like, you're in peace, so obviously you don't have anything to fight for. If you had your life currently threatened by something else, you would then have to choose to fight to retain it. And so he feels that people in this particular peaceful world don't have that experience, obviously. But this is where we get strike number 1. Mikoto confronts Shirogane, and yeah, that was his first person he ran into that he wasn't supposed to run into. I thought that was like, oh my, here we go. He's gonna end up running into every single person, just like I said he shouldn't be doing in the previous episode. But no, Mikoto drags him off to play some Virtual On. Yes, it's Virtual On. And acknowledges the fact that Mikoto's a boy in that world again. And then he runs into Sumiko. Sumiko's walking home with some groceries, and yeah, he's supposedly supposed to eat with her or whatever, and he's like, no. I think this is the point in which he really does kind of acknowledge the beauty of her. Like, he remembers this person that he treasures so much, and he talks about how, like, your hands are so beautiful. That's kind of the most interesting way of putting it. Maybe he has a hand fetish, I don't know. But from this point on, he kind of just, dismisses himself and runs off because he's obviously has to go back to the previous world and jets off back to the beta world, where very quickly Kasumi ends up collapsing. And this is where we get like a huge information dump. Quite a lot of information. It's like, okay, now we're going to talk about every single alternative and what the alternative system is and what they're doing with it and every single iteration of but not the last one. We're not talking about the last one. She still refuses to talk about the last alternative. But yeah, it starts off with 1958. That's when they discovered there was extraterrestrials on Mars, and I think they only had like a Land Rover or whatever there, so they just seen them. Obviously, they had interplanetary travel tech, and kind of concerning. So this causes them to pretty much start with Alternative 1, which was the idea of gathering a whole bunch of people, linguistics, zoologists, mathematicians, cryptographers, all to come together to figure out how to communicate to these alien creatures. Establish some sort of connection, establish some sort of communication with them. And it fails. It's not working out. And eventually, they end up running into these same extraterrestrials on the moon. They're even closer now than they were before, and they're just viciously killing people. So they decide to enact Alternative 2 in 1968. And this is where they capture one of these and start studying it to try to figure out how it ticks. How does it communicate? And all they really find out from this is that they are extremely well adapted to harsh environments and that they have no digestive system or reproductive system. But the idea that they are now at the moon is terrifying to them because they have basically more advanced technology, and plus their physiological self is a lot more sturdy than humans. Then this jumps to 1973, where the Beta first land in Kaxar, and this is when Alternative 3 was created, in which they are trying to artificially engineer Esper-enhanced people, Esper-capable individuals. And so they start breeding, basically marrying people that have ESP and trying to breed them to the point where they can get the most, highest level of perception ESP person possible, and then clone that person apparently. And that's pretty much where Kasumi came from. And their whole desire was to use these Espers to pretty much communicate to, or at least find images from the minds of these Beta, because they can essentially pull information from the minds of the Beta in pictures and colors or something like that. So they're trying to pull information from them and find out, are they sentient or whatever. And they do establish that they are sentient. But the problem they end up running into is that they apparently don't consider humans as life forms. So it kind of insinuates that they're killing humans. It's like they see humans as cattle. Like, there's no issue. Just kill it. It's in your way, or just kill it and consume it. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing, because right here, Yuko mentions that was the end of Alternative 3. And then she starts talking about Alternative 4. But then she jumps back and starts talking about that they have another ability within the Espers, and that is to project an image to the mind of another being. And what they were trying to do was to project an image of peace, like some sort of image that would indicate peace to the Beta. And she says specifically that they either didn't understand that they either don't understand the concept of peace, or they ignored the image. And again, I don't know if they were implying that this is a part of Alternative 4, because like I said, she started bringing up Alternative 4. But again, we already know that Alternative 4 is in something to do with this building of Unit 00. So I'm thinking that she's saying that Alternative 3 was specifically about reading the minds, and then that this was just a part of it. But again, when he inquires what Alternative 4 is, again, we get it's to build Unit 00. That's all I'm going to say. You won't understand it. Don't bother. And he keeps pressing, and she's like, well, you seem like, he says something like your desire for curiosity often tramples on other people's feelings or something like that. You're not realizing that you're stepping on somebody else's feelings, which I think I don't know if she's implying that this is in relation to what it involves is Kasumi, and what it involves within Kasumi would be embarrassing for him to know, because obviously at this point we know that Kasumi can read minds. So maybe she doesn't want him to know what she's going to be doing with involvement to Alternative 4. But I have to admit, this part of this entire episode I was frustrated with, because Yuko was like all over the place. Because like I said, she just it starts with the whole thing of like, okay, she collapsed because she has to do something for you. Then it just jumps right over to talking about Alternative 4, or the alternatives. And then it shoots over to talk about Kasumi, which obviously was involved with that. And then it shoots over to talking about what Kasumi had to do in order to prevent Shirogane from being lost in his travel to his previous world. And then it shoots back over to, it felt like it was all over the place. And like, I wasn't really following the direction of conversation. She also shot over to talking about how technically Kasumi is the reason why she trusted Shirogane to begin with, because obviously she's able to read minds, or at least see images of the mind. And so she was able to see these images from Shirogane of this other world to then collaborate with what he was telling Yuko about his previous world that was peaceful and had no Beta. But at any rate, following this conversation, Kasumi wakes up. She's embarrassed because they're looking through this book and seeing how she essentially had to create these images of him and stay with him in order to, again, like I said last episode, I kind of assumed it was like an anchor that she was creating to prevent him from being lost in this previous world. And so her embarrassment, I guess the situation or what she had to do, she ends up running off. But again, this gets into the whole aspect of, I think the reason why it's okay for me personally to be watching this adaptation without the knowledge of the previous visual novel is that it really does seem like at this point, it's hitting again on this idea that we're getting a perspective of Shirogane who doesn't really remember much. He's trying to pull these memories. He's asking Kasumi to give him the memories that he's lost of Sumika. And so again, I think it's okay to not really have that previous knowledge of what he's been through, Though again, I do acknowledge the idea that technically makes the regathering of those memories more impactful. I'm getting it from perspective of Shirogane, who doesn't have that memory. Following this, we got to get this little brief moment where we see, which I'm guessing is the Imperial Japan is... I don't know. This is kind of one of those issues where I have where it doesn't specifically state who's on the screen. It just has a room of people talking about something they're going to do, and then you see stuff happen and they're not related to the situation. Because we end up finding out later that the IGA ends up going and relocating a bunch of people from their homeland that escaped back to their homeland. So refugees that went back to their home, the IGA apparently went there and pulled them back out of their home again. And there's apparently this room full of people that are mad, and they want to stop the Imperial military because they're causing issues with the people. They're overstepping their bounds or whatever. They need to take action. And so it cuts away from them. We get a couple more scenes, and it cuts back, and we see this scene where they're in the mess hall, and they're talking about the IGA rescuing this group of illegally returning refugees, and then a shot with those people from that room going there saying they need to do something before there's nothing for these people to return home to. So, I don't know. As much as we don't like it whenever it cuts to a scene with a group of people in a room, and it just has like the subtitles on the bottom saying blah, blah, blah group, blah, blah department or whatever, kind of would have been nice to have that here. I'm assuming this is the group we were talking about in the previous episode, but still, it kind of wish they would explain who that was. The Strategic Study Group, I think. I think that was the group they named them in the last episode. But like I said, the Strategic Study Group, I think, is the group, and they were unhappy with what the Imperial Army was doing, and yeah, like I said, the Imperial Army is removing people, and they don't like it. Which it does note when they see this news bit that Shiragani's like, man, that was the place that we had to go to. That was a shot where it had Maya crying, and they were at this volcano-looking place. They had to go there, and he says that saves them 10 days because in the previous world, they had to do that. Which I really hated this part because, like, Shirogane goes nuts on Maya. Like, Maya's like, you know this is all a lie. They don't have the resources to do that. This is all a lie. They're taking people from their homes, and Shiragani's like, well, what do you expect them to do? The military is there to protect the people. Do you expect us to risk the entire livelihood of humankind just for the random likes for citizens? And I'm like, okay, I kind of assume at this point it's Shiragani's frustration because he's having to go through all this stuff, and it kind of seems like it relates to the first comments of this episode, where Shirogane is talking about people that don't understand about fighting for something that you cherish, and that he's almost like he's becoming less compassionate of the civilians. Like, they're not involved with what we're fighting for. These people that are doing nothing but sitting around and being refugees, but they're not fighting for anything. It does really feel like he's being not compassionate for other people. Instead, he's just so focused on saving mankind that anything else is just noise. Like, these people, they're just noise. Focus on what's important. At the same time, I can also see it being a thing of keeping Maya from getting involved. Like, maybe he felt that Maya would end up getting involved with the situation down there, and that would have put him behind by, again, 10 days. But I think it was more, again, I think that frustration is building in him, and he's becoming not compassionate for other people, but rather just the fight, just the focus. And I really didn't like that, because I think this is probably one of the few points in which I really didn't like Shirogane. Like, I really do feel at this point right here, despite what he believes about the situation, the way that he went about talking to Maya about the situation, obviously this is something that he knew Maya was passionate about. He has the memories of her crying for these people. Why wouldn't he know that this is a hurtful situation for her? Instead of getting on his high horse and breaking her down, maybe he felt like he needed to correct her and set her in a proper direction. But the way that he was saying it lacked any compassion whatsoever. And it really did kind of set him as almost a villain, in a sense. I really didn't like it. Yeah, despite that, he gets interrupted by Ayamine, who drops her tray and runs off. And again, if she's part of this anti-alternative group, is the worst spy ever, because she decided to put a gigantic envelope in her back pocket that falls out on the floor, leaving this note behind that is sealed. And yeah, he kind of goes to her place. She's not there, and there's, again, every letter spread out on a table. Again, at this point, there's three conclusions I have. One, this is just one of those situations where it makes it look like she's something bad, but it's not really that, because, again, it's too obvious. Two, she's an idiot, and she's the worst spy ever that likes to put out all of her letters of being a terrorist and an anti-alternative group member. And Or 3, the writer's just really bad. It's those 3 things. I'm going to assume it's the first one, that it's just going to be one of those, this looks bad, but it's not really that. But she does technically say, you're better off not knowing, I don't want to have to kill you. But again, that could be her being a part of, you know, her being a good person, just he's not allowed to know this information because it's confidential within their organization. Like probably a double agent. I'm going to assume probably a double agent. I'm going to assume Ayamine is probably a double agent. Again, otherwise it's either bad writing or a terrible character, a really dumb character. I forgot to get into it, but yes, we did have a scene where Shirogane was with Kasumi. It was funny because I think that it looked like he was technically using Cat's Cradle to pull memories out of Kasumi about the previous worlds. So I guess he kind of mentioned the idea that he promised to learn it or something like that. So I'm assuming he's just kind of utilizing this to try to spark memories of the past. But yeah, that's when they get into the whole situation about talking about nostalgia. She doesn't understand what it is. And he's like, why wouldn't you tell me? It's like, chill, dude. But yeah, it's basically trying to explain to her what nostalgia is, this idea of like building this image in your head of something that you enjoy, and then having that there, getting it so crisp and perfect in your mind so that later on you have that feeling of it, that desire for it at some later point. But again, he really does hit on the idea that feeling of nostalgia is exactly why he knows that he can't remain here. Sumika is very important to him. And I think this is a crucial part again in that whole storytelling, is the importance of Sumika. Without her in his world, it's not right. He doesn't feel it's right. He needs to have that absence of Sumika is detrimental to him. Like, he needs a world where Sumika's in it. The other thing it kind of established here is that he's trying to figure out what Kazumi's dream is. Like, what does she want? Obviously, she's pretty much raised to the idea that she's supposed to read the minds of the beta, but obviously asking her what she wants. What's the things that she desires? And I'm sure eventually it'll probably be him, and that creates that conundrum of, can you really return kind of thing. But yeah, like I said, overall, really solid episode. A lot of stuff covered here. I think it hit a lot of really solid points in it, really hitting heavy on the world that he was from. A very brief look, but I think, like I said, at the same time, it is hitting decently enough on the importance of that previous world. Again, granted, I don't have a full-blown story. I don't have story arcs involving, Sumika and Shirogane having an argument at a McDonald's or something like that. But at the same time, I do get that is important to him. And I think the other way they probably could have portrayed that better is maybe having a lot of flash memories of Sumika. Obviously, they don't have, animation content there of this entire story arc of the previous story, but you can show that. It can be shown. They just have to animate it. Animate brief shots of all these experiences he's had with her and have those constantly flashing through his head as he's regaining those memories and having that feeling of nostalgia. But even still, I don't find it detrimental. I'm sure it's a lot more impactful, and I appreciate people kind of mentioning the idea that, hey, look, you could probably get a better experience if you do this. I'm just not a big visual novel reader. I barely have time to keep up with the anime that I keep up with, but either way, I'm enjoying this so far. Looking forward to more. Kasumi is definitely amazing. Sumika, definitely cute. By the way, was that Sayoko that was in that room of the meeting? I think that was. But anyways, that's my impressions on episode 7. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below, comment, let me know it's the episode. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. We definitely appreciate everybody that does. And y'all take care.